What if I told you that the moment you stopped learning, you started dying? Not physically, but mentally, professionally, and competitively. Right now, while you're listening to this, millions of people around the world have already decided that their education is complete. They graduated from school, got their degree, landed their job, and mentally checked out from the pursuit of knowledge. They believe they know enough to coast through life. They are wrong. And their mistake is about to become your greatest advantage. Here's a terrifying reality. The half-life of learned skills is shrinking rapidly. In the 1,960 seconds, the skills you learned in college could carry you through a 30-year career. Today, the shelf life of most professional skills is less than 5 years, and in technology fields, it's closer to 2 years. This means that if you're not actively learning new skills, you're not just standing still, you're falling behind at an accelerating pace. But here's where it gets interesting. While 99% of people are mentally retiring from education the moment they leave school, a small elite group understands something profound. Continuous learning is not just an advantage, it's the only sustainable competitive strategy in a rapidly changing world. These people treat learning like a daily practice, like exercise for the mind, and the results are staggering. They advance faster, earn more, adapt quicker, and consistently outperform their peers who rely solely on their formal education. This audiobook isn't just about motivation or inspiration. It's about giving you the exact system that the top 1% use to continuously educate themselves, stay ahead of change, and dominate their fields. You're going to learn how to build a learning machine that operates automatically, how to absorb and retain information at an elite level, and how to turn knowledge into real-world results that compound over time. The question isn't whether you have time to educate yourself daily. The question is whether you can afford not to. Because while you're deciding, your competition is already 3 steps ahead, and the gap is widening every single day. Chapter 1. The Learning Cliff. Why most people stop growing after school. The moment you walked across that graduation stage, something invisible but powerful happened. Society told you that your learning journey was complete. You had your degree, your certification, your ticket to the adult world. The message was clear. You've learned enough. Now, go apply it. This is one of the most dangerous lies ever sold to an entire generation. And it's keeping 99% of people locked in mediocrity. Think about this for a moment. In school, you were forced to learn every single day. You had teachers pushing you, assignments demanding your attention, tests measuring your progress, and a structured environment that made learning inevitable. Your brain was constantly being challenged, stretched, and developed. But the moment you graduated, all of that structure disappeared. Suddenly, learning became optional, and most people chose to stop. This isn't an accident. It's a systematic conditioning that begins early in life. The traditional education system teaches us to view learning as something that has an end point. You start in kindergarten, progress through the grades, and eventually graduate. The implicit message is that learning is a phase of life, not a way of life. Once you've completed your formal education, the assumption is that you're prepared for everything the world will throw at you for the next 40 years. But here's the reality that no one talks about. Formal education only gives you the foundation, not the building. It teaches you how to think, how to process information, and basic skills. But it cannot possibly prepare you for a world that changes faster than any curriculum can adapt. By the time a new course is developed, approved, and taught, the information is often already outdated. The most successful people understand this fundamental truth. Graduation is not the end of education. It's the beginning of real learning. Warren Buffett, one of the world's most successful investors, reads 500 pages every single day. Bill Gates takes a week off twice a year just to read and learn. Oprah Winfrey calls reading her secret weapon. These people didn't become successful and then start learning. They became successful because they never stopped learning. The learning cliff is real, and it's steep. Studies show that the average person's knowledge and skills begin to stagnate within 2 years of leaving formal education. Their vocabulary stops expanding. Their critical thinking skills plateau, and their ability to adapt to new challenges diminishes. Meanwhile, the world around them continues to evolve, creating an ever-widening gap between what they know and what they need to know to remain relevant. This stagnation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process that feels comfortable at first. You're applying what you learned in school, you're getting by, and you're busy with work and life. The problem is that while you're staying busy, you're not growing. You're essentially running in place while the track moves beneath your feet. You might feel productive, but you're actually falling behind relative to the pace of change in your field and in the world. The psychology behind this learning cliff is fascinating and frightening. When people stop learning, their brains literally begin to change. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections, decreases with age and lack of use. The neurons that aren't regularly challenged begin to weaken, and the brain becomes less adaptable to new information and experiences. This creates a vicious cycle. The less you learn, the harder it becomes to learn, which makes you even less likely to pursue new knowledge. Another factor that contributes to the learning cliff is the comfort zone trap. Once people develop a certain level of competence in their field, they often stop pushing themselves to grow. They become comfortable with their current skill set and assume it will carry them through their career. This is particularly dangerous in today's economy, where entire industries can be disrupted overnight, and new technologies can make established skills obsolete. The most insidious part of the learning cliff is that it's invisible to those who fall off it. People who stop learning don't realize they're falling behind because they're surrounded by others who are also stagnating. It's only when they encounter someone who has continued to grow and learn that they realize how far they've fallen behind. By then, the gap can feel insurmountable, leading to resignation and acceptance of mediocrity. But here's the empowering truth. Recognizing the learning cliff is the first step to avoiding it, or climbing back up it. The moment you acknowledge that continuous learning is not optional but essential, you can begin to rebuild your learning habits and reclaim your competitive edge. The brain's neuroplasticity means that it's never too late to start growing again. But it requires intentional effort and a systematic approach. The people who stay ahead of the pack are those who treat learning like a non-negotiable daily practice. They understand that in a world of constant change, the only stable strategy is continuous adaptation. And the only way to adapt continuously is to learn continuously. They don't wait for their employer to provide training. They don't rely on formal education programs. And they don't assume that their current knowledge will remain relevant. Instead, they take full responsibility for their ongoing education and make it a priority every single day. Chapter 2. The Neuroscience of Continuous Learning. How your brain becomes a supercomputer. Your brain is not a computer that came with fixed hardware and limited storage. It's more like a living, breathing, constantly evolving supercomputer that gets more powerful the more you use it. But here's what most people don't understand. This incredible machine has a use it or lose it operating system. The moment you stop challenging it with new information and experiences, it begins to literally shrink and slow down. Neuroscientists have discovered something revolutionary about how the brain works that changes everything we thought we knew about learning and intelligence. It's called neuroplasticity, and it means that your brain can physically rewire itself throughout your entire life based on what you expose it to. Every time you learn something new, you're not just storing information. You're actually creating new neural pathways and strengthening existing ones. Think of your brain like a network of highways. When you first learn something new, it's like blazing a small trail through the wilderness. The more you practice and reinforce that knowledge, the more that trail becomes a path, then a road, then a highway. The neural pathways become more efficient, faster, and more reliable. But here's the crucial part. If you stop using those pathways, they begin to weaken and eventually get overgrown, just like an abandoned road. This is why people who stop learning experience a decline not just in what they know, but in their capacity to learn new things. Their brain's neural networks become less flexible, less adaptive, and less capable of forming new connections. It's not that they've reached the limits of their intelligence, it's that they've allowed their learning infrastructure to deteriorate. But when you commit to daily learning, something extraordinary happens. Your brain begins to optimize itself for acquiring and processing new information. The hippocampus, which is responsible for forming new memories, actually grows larger in people who engage in regular learning activities. The prefrontal cortex, which handles complex thinking and decision-making, becomes more active and efficient. Even the white matter, which connects different regions of the brain, increases in density, allowing for faster and more sophisticated thinking. The most fascinating aspect of neuroplasticity is that it's not just about learning new facts or skills. Every time you challenge your brain with novel information, you're improving your overall cognitive capacity. It's like going to the gym for your mind. Just as physical exercise strengthens not just specific muscles but your entire cardiovascular system, mental exercise strengthens not just specific knowledge areas but your entire thinking apparatus. Research has shown that people who engage in lifelong learning have larger, more complex brains with better connectivity between regions. They process information faster, make better decisions, and maintain cognitive sharpness well into old age. Brain scans of continuous learners show patterns that are remarkably similar to much younger brains, suggesting that regular learning actually slows down brain aging. But here's where it gets really interesting. The benefits of continuous learning compound over time in ways that are almost impossible to measure. Every piece of new knowledge you acquire doesn't just add to your existing knowledge base. It creates new connections with everything you already know. This is called associative learning, and it's how breakthrough insights and creative solutions emerge. When you learn continuously, You're not just collecting facts. You're building a vast, interconnected web of knowledge that allows you to see patterns and connections that others miss. This is why polymaths and Renaissance thinkers throughout history have been able to make revolutionary discoveries by connecting ideas from seemingly unrelated fields. They had built such rich, diverse knowledge networks that they could see relationships that specialists in single fields couldn't perceive. The neuroscience also reveals why so many people struggle with learning as adults. Their brains have adapted to routine and predictability. When you do the same things day after day, your brain creates efficient shortcuts to handle those tasks with minimal energy expenditure. This is great for productivity in familiar situations, but terrible for growth and adaptation. Breaking out of these neural ruts requires intentional effort. You have to deliberately expose your brain to new challenges, unfamiliar concepts, and different ways of thinking. This can feel uncomfortable at first because your brain prefers the easy path it's already carved out. But with consistent practice, learning new things becomes easier, more enjoyable, and more automatic. The key to maximizing neuroplasticity is variety and challenge. Your brain thrives on novelty and complexity. This means that effective, continuous learning isn't just about reading more books in your field. It's about exposing yourself to diverse ideas, different perspectives, and challenging concepts that force your brain to build new neural pathways. One of the most powerful aspects of understanding neuroplasticity is that it destroys the fixed mindset that holds so many people back. When you realize that intelligence isn't fixed, that your brain can literally grow and improve throughout your life, it changes how you approach challenges and setbacks. Instead of avoiding difficult subjects because you think you're not good at math or not a creative person, you understand that these are just current limitations that can be overcome with the right kind of practice and persistence. The people who stay ahead of 99% of others have learned to treat their brains like high-performance vehicles that require premium fuel and regular maintenance. They understand that feeding their minds with challenging, diverse content isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about upgrading their cognitive operating system to handle increasingly complex challenges and opportunities. Chapter 3. The 1% Learning System. The daily habits that compound into genius. The difference between people who continuously grow and those who stagnate isn't talent, time, or natural ability. It's their system. The top 1% of achievers in any field don't rely on motivation or inspiration to drive their learning. They have built automatic systems that ensure they're growing every single day, regardless of how they feel or how busy they are. The 1% learning system is based on a fundamental principle. Small, consistent actions compound into extraordinary results over time. Most people approach learning like they approach dieting. They wait until they feel motivated, then try to consume massive amounts of information in a short period, burn out, and quit. The 1% understand that learning is like compound interest. It's the daily deposits that create wealth, not the occasional, large withdrawal. The first pillar of the 1% learning system is what I call the minimum viable learning principle. This means establishing a learning habit that is so small and easy that you literally cannot fail to do it. Most people set grandiose learning goals like, I'm going to read for 2 hours every day, or I'm going to take an online course every month. These goals sound impressive, but they're setting themselves up for failure because they require too much willpower and time. Instead, the 1% start with a commitment that feels almost embarrassingly small. Reading for 10 minutes a day, listening to one educational podcast on the way to work, or learning just 3 new words in a foreign language. The key is not the amount of learning, but the consistency of the habit. Once the habit is established and automated, you can gradually increase the intensity and duration. The power of this approach becomes clear when you do the math. If you read just 15 minutes a day, that's about 90 hours of reading per year. The average person reads 250 words per minute, which means you'd read about 1.35 million words annually. That's equivalent to about 5 full-length books just from 15 minutes of daily reading. Most people don't read 5 books in 5 years, yet this small habit would give you that in just 1 year. But the 1% learning system goes far beyond just consuming information. It's built around 4 core components that work together to maximize both learning efficiency and retention. The first component is strategic consumption, which means being extremely selective about what you learn and ensuring it aligns with your goals and interests. Random learning might be interesting, but it doesn't create the kind of focused expertise that leads to exceptional results. The 1% identify the core knowledge areas that will drive the biggest returns in their personal and professional lives, and they focus their learning energy on those areas. They might spend 70% of their learning time on their primary field of expertise, 20% on complementary skills, and 10% on completely unrelated subjects for creative cross-pollination. The second component is active processing. Most people treat learning like a passive activity. They read or listen and assume that exposure equals understanding. The 1% understand that real learning happens when you actively engage with the material. This means taking notes, asking questions, creating summaries, teaching the concepts to others, or applying the knowledge in real-world situations. One of the most powerful active processing techniques is what I call the Feynman method, named after the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman. After learning something new, you immediately try to explain it in simple terms, as if you were teaching it to a child. If you can't explain it simply, you don't truly understand it. This process forces you to identify gaps in your understanding and solidify your knowledge. The third component is spaced repetition, which leverages the brain's natural learning patterns to maximize retention. Research shows that we forget new information rapidly, unless it's reinforced at specific intervals. The 1% build review cycles into their learning system, returning to important concepts at strategic intervals to move them from short-term to long-term memory. This doesn't mean mindlessly rereading the same material. Instead, it means encountering the same concepts in different contexts, applying them in various situations, and connecting them to new information. This creates a web of associations that makes the knowledge more robust and easier to recall when needed. The fourth component is application acceleration, which means finding ways to use new knowledge as quickly as possible in real-world situations. Learning that stays theoretical never becomes truly valuable. The 1% are constantly looking for opportunities to apply what they've learned, whether in their work, personal projects, or conversations with others. This might mean volunteering to lead a project that requires a new skill you're developing, starting a side project that applies concepts from a business book you're reading, or simply bringing up ideas from your learning in relevant conversations. The key is to create a short feedback loop between learning and application, so you can immediately see what works, what doesn't, and what you need to learn next. The 1% also understand the importance of learning velocity. They've learned to speed up their information processing without sacrificing comprehension. This includes techniques like speed reading, strategic skimming, and identifying the key concepts that carry the most value in any piece of content. They can quickly determine whether a book, article, or video contains valuable information and extract the essence without getting bogged down in unnecessary details. But perhaps the most important aspect of the 1% learning system is environmental design. The 1% don't rely on willpower to maintain their learning habits. They structure their environment to make learning inevitable and ignorance inconvenient. This means removing barriers to learning and adding friction to distracting activities. Their homes and offices are set up as learning environments with books, audiobooks, and educational materials easily accessible. They've eliminated or minimized sources of mindless entertainment and replaced them with educational alternatives. Instead of scrolling social media during downtime, they have educational podcasts queued up. Instead of watching random YouTube videos, they have curated playlists of educational content. They also leverage dead time throughout their day for passive learning. Commute time becomes podcast time. Exercise time becomes audiobook time. Waiting in line becomes vocabulary review time. They understand that there are hundreds of small pockets of time throughout the week that can be converted from wasted moments into learning opportunities. The compound effect of this system is staggering. While the average person's knowledge and skills plateau shortly after formal education, people who implement the 1% learning system continue to grow exponentially. After just 1 year, they're noticeably ahead of their peers. After 5 years, they're operating at a different level entirely. After a decade, they're recognized as experts and thought leaders in their fields. Chapter 4. Information Diet. How to consume knowledge like premium fuel. Your mind is constantly consuming information, whether you're aware of it or not. Every conversation, every article, every video, every social media post is feeding your brain data that shapes your thinking, influences your decisions, and ultimately determines your results. But here's what 99% of people don't realize. The quality of information you consume is just as important as the quality of food you eat. And most people are feeding their minds junk food. Think about the average person's daily information diet. They wake up and immediately check their phone, flooding their mind with random news, social media updates, and notifications. They consume clickbait headlines, gossip, complaints, and drama. Throughout the day, they're exposed to advertising, negative news, and mindless entertainment. By evening, they're mentally exhausted not from learning or growing, but from processing an overwhelming amount of low-value, often contradictory information. This is the information equivalent of eating fast food for every meal. It might fill you up temporarily, but it doesn't provide the nutrients your mind needs to function optimally. Worse, it actually impairs your cognitive function, reduces your attention span, and creates cravings for more junk information. The result is a mind that feels busy but isn't productive, that feels informed but isn't wise. The 1% understand that information is not neutral. Every piece of content you consume is programming your subconscious mind, shaping your beliefs, and influencing your behavior. They treat information consumption like professional athletes treat nutrition, with careful attention to quality, timing, and purpose. They understand that what you feed your mind determines what kind of thoughts you think, what kind of decisions you make, and ultimately, what kind of results you get. The first principle of an optimal information diet is intentionality. Instead of passively consuming whatever information crosses their path, the 1% are deliberate about what they expose their minds to. They start each day with a clear intention about what they want to learn and why. They have specific goals for their information consumption, and they measure their progress toward those goals. This doesn't mean being rigid or obsessive about learning. It means being conscious and purposeful. Before picking up a book, listening to a podcast, or reading an article, they ask themselves, how does this align with my learning goals? What specific value am I hoping to extract? How will I apply this information? This simple practice filters out 90% of the noise and ensures that their limited attention is focused on high-value content. The second principle is source quality. The 1% are extremely selective about their information sources. They understand that not all sources are created equal, and they prioritize learning from the best minds and most credible authorities in any field. Instead of getting their business advice from random blog posts, they read books by successful entrepreneurs who have actually built companies. Instead of learning about health from social media influencers, they study research from respected medical institutions. They also understand the importance of primary sources versus secondary sources. Primary sources are original research, first-hand accounts, and direct observations. Secondary sources are interpretations, summaries, and opinions about primary sources. While secondary sources can be valuable for getting overviews and different perspectives, the 1% prioritize primary sources because they provide the most accurate and complete information. This source hierarchy extends to the credibility and track record of authors and experts. The 1% research the backgrounds of the people they learn from. They look for evidence of real-world success, relevant experience, and demonstrated expertise. They're skeptical of advice from people who haven't achieved what they're teaching or who don't have skin in the game. The third principle is depth over breadth. While it's tempting to try to learn everything about everything, the 1% understand that true expertise comes from going deep on important topics rather than skimming the surface of many topics. They identify the core knowledge areas that will drive the biggest returns in their lives and careers, and they invest heavily in building comprehensive understanding in those areas. This doesn't mean being narrow-minded or ignoring other subjects. It means having a clear hierarchy of learning priorities and allocating time accordingly. They might spend 70% of their learning time on their primary area of expertise, 20% on complementary skills, and 10% on interesting but non-essential subjects for mental stimulation and creative cross-pollination. The fourth principle is balanced nutrition for the mind. Just like a healthy physical diet requires a variety of nutrients, a healthy information diet requires a variety of content types and perspectives. The 1% don't just read books in their field. They expose themselves to different formats, different authors, and different viewpoints to build a well-rounded understanding of complex topics. This includes consuming content from people they disagree with. They understand that intellectual growth comes from exposure to challenging ideas and conflicting perspectives. They seek out the strongest arguments against their current beliefs and the best advocates for positions they initially find questionable. This doesn't mean being gullible or accepting everything they read, but it means being open to changing their minds when presented with compelling evidence. The fifth principle is timing and mental state optimization. The 1% understand that when you consume information is almost as important as what information you consume. They align their learning activities with their natural energy cycles and cognitive rhythms. They consume the most challenging and important content when their minds are fresh and alert, typically in the morning, and save lighter content for when their mental energy is lower. They also understand the importance of mental state preparation. Before diving into important learning materials, they clear their minds of distractions, set aside adequate time, and create an environment conducive to deep thinking. This might mean turning off all notifications, finding a quiet space, or even doing a brief meditation to center their attention. The sixth principle is active curation and filtering. The 1% don't wait for good information to find them. They actively seek it out and build systems to filter the signal from the noise. They subscribe to high-quality newsletters, follow thought leaders who consistently provide value, and create information feeds that serve their learning goals rather than someone else's engagement metrics. They also use technology strategically to support their information diet. This might mean using apps that block distracting websites during learning time, setting up RSS feeds for high-quality blogs, or using read later services to save valuable content for when they have time to process it properly. They understand that in an attention economy, you have to be proactive about protecting and directing your focus. The compound effect of implementing these principles is transformative. While the average person's mind is cluttered with irrelevant information and their thinking is clouded by cognitive junk food, people who optimize their information diet develop clarity, focus, and wisdom. They make better decisions because they have better information. They see opportunities that others miss because they understand patterns and trends. They solve problems more effectively because they have a richer knowledge base to draw from. Most importantly, they enjoy learning because they're consuming high-quality content that genuinely improves their lives rather than low-quality content that wastes their time. Their information diet becomes a source of energy and inspiration rather than mental fatigue and overwhelm. Chapter 5. Building your learning infrastructure, creating an environment for inevitable growth. Your environment is silently shaping your behavior every moment of every day. The books on your shelf, the apps on your phone, the people you spend time with, and even the physical setup of your space are all either supporting your learning goals or sabotaging them. Most people leave their environment to chance and then wonder why they struggle to maintain consistent learning habits. The 1% understand that willpower is unreliable, but environmental design is bulletproof. Think about it this way. Every behavior requires a trigger, and your environment is full of triggers that are constantly cueing specific actions. When you see your phone, you're triggered to check it. When you see your TV remote, you're triggered to turn on the television. When you see junk food in your kitchen, you're triggered to eat it. These environmental cues are so powerful that they often override our conscious intentions and long-term goals. The same principle applies to learning. If you want to read more but your books are buried in a closet while your TV remote is sitting on the coffee table, guess which behavior your environment is encouraging. If you want to listen to educational podcasts but your phone defaults to a music app, what do you think you'll end up doing during your commute? Creating a learning infrastructure means intentionally designing your environment to make educational behaviors easy, obvious, and irresistible, while making distracting behaviors difficult, hidden, and unattractive. This isn't about having perfect self-control. It's about setting up systems that make the right choices automatic. The first element of learning infrastructure is creating obvious cues for educational activities. This means placing learning materials in highly visible locations where you'll encounter them naturally throughout your day. Books should be on your nightstand, coffee table, and desk, not hidden on a bookshelf. Educational apps should be on your phone's home screen, while entertainment apps should be buried in folders or removed entirely. The key is to reduce the friction between intention and action. Every small barrier between you and a positive behavior increases the likelihood that you won't follow through. If you have to search for a book, find your earphones, or remember a password to access educational content, you've created unnecessary resistance that will wear down your motivation over time. The 1% also create what I call learning triggers throughout their environment. These are visual reminders that prompt educational thinking and behavior. This might be inspirational quotes about learning, lists of books to read, or even simple notes with questions they want to explore. These triggers serve as constant reminders of their learning goals and help maintain focus throughout the day. The second element is eliminating or minimizing environmental distractions. This is often more important than adding positive cues because distractions can completely derail learning sessions. The most obvious distractions are digital, phones, social media, news websites, and entertainment platforms. The 1% are ruthless about removing these distractions from their learning environment. This might mean putting their phone in another room during reading time, using website blockers during study sessions, or even having separate devices for work and entertainment. The goal is to create spaces and times that are completely dedicated to learning, free from the competing demands of modern technology. But distractions aren't limited to digital devices. Physical clutter, uncomfortable seating, poor lighting, and excessive noise can all impair learning effectiveness. The 1% optimize their physical learning environment for comfort, focus, and minimal distractions. This doesn't require a fancy home office. It just requires intentional attention to the factors that support or hinder cognitive performance. The third element of learning infrastructure is social environment design. The people you spend time with have an enormous influence on your learning habits and intellectual growth. If you're surrounded by people who don't value learning, who mock education, or who spend their time on mindless entertainment, maintaining learning habits becomes an uphill battle against social pressure. The 1% actively cultivate relationships with other learners and thinkers. They seek out mentors who are where they want to be, peers who share their commitment to growth, and communities focused on intellectual development. This might mean joining book clubs, attending lectures, participating in online learning communities, or simply having regular conversations with people who challenge their thinking. They also limit their exposure to people who drain their intellectual energy or discourage their learning efforts. This doesn't mean being antisocial or arrogant. It means being strategic about how they spend their limited social time and ensuring that their relationships support rather than sabotage their goals. The fourth element is creating learning rituals and routines that make education automatic. Rituals are powerful because they reduce decision fatigue and create psychological momentum. When learning becomes a routine part of your day, like brushing your teeth or eating breakfast, it requires less mental energy to maintain. The most effective learning rituals are tied to existing habits or natural transition points in your day. This might mean reading for 15 minutes every morning with your coffee, listening to podcasts during every commute, or reviewing notes before bed. The key is to identify moments in your existing routine where learning activities can be seamlessly integrated. The 1% also create what I call learning landmarks throughout their day. These are specific times and contexts dedicated to different types of learning. For example, morning might be for reading challenging books that require deep focus, commute time for educational podcasts, lunch breaks for lighter articles, and evenings for skill practice or online courses. The fifth element is leveraging technology to support rather than sabotage learning goals. While technology can be a massive distraction, it can also be a powerful learning amplifier when used strategically. The 1% use apps and tools that automate and optimize their learning process. This might include spaced repetition apps for memorizing important information, read later services for curating high-quality content, note-taking apps for capturing and organizing insights, or audiobook apps for maximizing passive learning time. The key is choosing tools that genuinely enhance learning rather than creating new forms of digital distraction. They also use technology to track their learning progress and maintain accountability. This might mean using apps that monitor reading time, keeping digital learning journals, or sharing learning goals with online communities. The act of measurement and tracking often improves performance simply by increasing awareness and creating a sense of momentum. The sixth element is creating feedback loops that reinforce learning behaviors. Positive reinforcement strengthens habits, while negative consequences weaken them. The 1% build systems that provide immediate positive feedback for learning activities and gentle negative consequences for avoiding them. This might mean celebrating small learning victories, tracking streaks of consistent study, or creating accountability partnerships with other learners. The goal is to make learning immediately rewarding rather than something that only pays off in the distant future. The compound effect of building strong learning infrastructure is that education becomes effortless and automatic. Instead of fighting against your environment and relying on willpower to maintain learning habits, your environment actively supports and encourages growth. Learning becomes the path of least resistance rather than a constant struggle against distracting forces. People who invest in learning infrastructure often report that their biggest challenge isn't finding time or motivation to learn. It's finding time for everything else they want to do because learning has become so engaging and rewarding. They've created an environment where intellectual growth is inevitable, and that inevitability becomes their greatest competitive advantage. Chapter 6. Speed Learning Techniques. How to absorb information 10x faster. Most people learn at the speed of mediocrity. They read at the same pace they learned in elementary school, process information linearly, and assume that faster learning means lower comprehension. This is one of the most expensive misconceptions in personal development, and it's keeping 99% of people trapped in the slow lane, while the elite race ahead at lightning speed. The truth is that your brain is capable of processing information far faster than you've ever imagined. Speed reading champions can absorb over 1,000 words per minute with full comprehension. Memory athletes can memorize entire decks of cards in under 2 minutes. Language learners can achieve conversational fluency in new languages within months instead of years. These aren't genetic freaks or special talents. They're people who have learned to optimize their learning velocity using specific techniques that anyone can master. The first breakthrough in speed learning is understanding that your brain doesn't process information the way you think it does. When you read word by word, you're forcing your brain to work like a 1,990 seconds dial-up modem when it's actually capable of broadband speeds. Your visual cortex can process entire chunks of text simultaneously. Your pattern recognition system can identify key concepts instantly, and your associative memory can connect new information to existing knowledge in milliseconds. The bottleneck isn't your brain's processing power. It's the inefficient methods you've been trained to use. Traditional education teaches linear learning because it's easy to standardize and test, not because it's optimal for human cognition. The most effective learners have broken free from these artificial constraints and learned to work with their brain's natural capabilities instead of against them. Speed reading is the foundation of accelerated learning. But most people approach it wrong. They focus on reading faster, without changing how they process information. Real speed reading isn't about moving your eyes faster. It's about changing how your brain extracts meaning from text. Instead of decoding individual words, you learn to recognize patterns, anticipate content, and absorb concepts in chunks. The key is eliminating subvocalization, the habit of silently pronouncing words in your head as you read. This internal voice limits your reading speed to your speaking speed, which is roughly 200 to 250 words per minute. But your eyes and brain can process visual information much faster than your internal voice can keep up. By breaking the subvocalization habit, you can immediately double or triple your reading speed without losing comprehension. Another critical technique is strategic skimming, which means learning to identify the structure and hierarchy of information before diving deep. Most content follows predictable patterns: introduction, main points, supporting evidence, examples, and conclusions. By quickly mapping this structure, you can focus your attention on the highest value sections and skim or skip redundant material. The 80/20 principle applies powerfully to information consumption. In most books, articles, and videos, 80% of the value comes from 20% of the content. Elite learners have developed the skill to quickly identify this high-value 20% and extract it efficiently. They can scan a business book and pull out the core framework in 30 minutes, or watch an educational video at 2x speed and capture the essential insights without missing anything important. But speed learning isn't just about consuming information faster. It's about processing it more effectively. The most powerful technique for this is called active questioning, where you approach new material with a specific set of questions that guide your attention and enhance comprehension. Before reading anything, elite learners ask themselves, what do I want to learn from this? How does this relate to what I already know? What can I apply immediately? What evidence supports these claims? These questions create a mental framework that helps you absorb relevant information while filtering out noise. Your brain becomes a selective filter instead of a passive sponge, capturing what matters and discarding what doesn't. This not only speeds up learning but dramatically improves retention because you're engaging with the material actively instead of passively. Another game-changing technique is called mental modeling, where you create visual and conceptual representations of complex information. Instead of trying to memorize facts in isolation, you build mental models that show how ideas connect, relate, and influence each other. This turns abstract concepts into concrete, memorable structures that are easier to understand, remember, and apply. The elite also master the art of learning in layers. Instead of trying to understand everything perfectly on the first pass, they make multiple rapid passes through material, each time adding another layer of depth and detail. The first pass might focus on main concepts, the second on supporting evidence, and the third on practical applications. This approach is far more efficient than trying to absorb everything linearly and results in better long-term retention. Technology can dramatically accelerate your learning when used strategically. Audiobooks at 1.5x or 2x speed can help you consume content faster, while training your brain to process information at higher speeds. Note-taking apps with search functions can help you quickly review and connect ideas across multiple sources. Spaced repetition software can automate the review process to ensure important information moves into long-term memory. But the most important aspect of speed learning is understanding when to slow down and when to accelerate. Not all information deserves the same level of attention. Elite learners quickly assess the value and complexity of material and adjust their approach accordingly. Simple concepts get rapid processing, while complex frameworks get deeper analysis. This variable speed approach maximizes both efficiency and comprehension. The compound effect of developing speed learning skills is extraordinary. If you can double your learning speed, you can literally double your knowledge acquisition in the same amount of time. Over months and years, this creates an insurmountable competitive advantage. While others are slowly plodding through one book, you've absorbed 5. While they're struggling to keep up with change in their field, you're already 3 steps ahead. Speed learning isn't about rushing or cutting corners. It's about optimizing your brain's natural capabilities and eliminating the artificial constraints that slow you down. It's about working smarter, not just harder, and using proven techniques to maximize your return on learning investment. Master these skills, and you'll find that the impossible becomes inevitable, and the learning that once seemed overwhelming becomes effortless. Chapter 7. Memory Mastery. Converting information into permanent knowledge. Learning without retention is like filling a bucket with holes in the bottom. You might feel productive while consuming information, but if you can't remember and recall what you've learned, you've wasted your time. This is the hidden tragedy of most people's educational efforts. They invest hours studying and reading, only to forget 90% of what they learned within weeks. The human brain wasn't designed for the information age. Your ancestors needed to remember where to find food, how to avoid predators, and which plants were poisonous. They didn't need to memorize historical dates, technical specifications, or abstract concepts. This is why your brain has evolved powerful systems for remembering experiences, emotions, and spatial information, but struggles with the abstract, sequential information that dominates modern learning. But here's the breakthrough. Memory isn't a fixed capacity that you're stuck with. It's a skill that can be dramatically improved using specific techniques that align with how your brain actually works. Memory athletes who can memorize thousands of digits or entire dictionaries aren't born with superhuman brains. They've learned to leverage their brain's natural memory systems in ways that multiply their capacity. The foundation of memory mastery is understanding the difference between recognition and recall. Recognition is when you see information and remember encountering it before. like recognizing someone's face. Recall is when you can retrieve information from memory without any external cues, like remembering someone's name. Most people mistake recognition for learning, assuming that if they recognize information when they see it again, they've learned it. But real knowledge requires recall, and recall requires specific encoding strategies. The most powerful memory technique ever discovered is called the method of Loci, also known as the memory palace technique. This method leverages your brain's exceptional spatial memory by associating information with specific locations in a familiar space. Instead of trying to remember abstract facts in isolation, you place them in vivid, memorable locations within a mental map. Here's how it works. Choose a familiar location like your home, workplace, or a route you travel regularly. Identify specific locations along a clear path through this space. Then, associate the information you want to remember with these locations using vivid, unusual, or emotional imagery. When you need to recall the information, you simply take a mental walk through your memory palace and collect the items you've placed there. This technique is so effective because it transforms abstract information into concrete, visual, and spatial memories, which your brain handles much more efficiently. World memory champions use this method to memorize thousands of pieces of information with near-perfect accuracy. And you can use it to remember everything from business presentations to foreign language vocabulary. But the memory palace is just one tool in the memory mastery toolkit. Another crucial technique is elaborative encoding, which means creating rich, meaningful connections between new information and your existing knowledge. Instead of trying to memorize isolated facts, you weave new information into the fabric of what you already know, creating multiple pathways for retrieval. This might mean connecting a new business concept to a personal experience, relating a historical event to a current situation, or linking a technical process to a familiar analogy. The more connections you create, the more robust your memory becomes. If one pathway fails, you have multiple backup routes to the same information. The spacing effect is another critical principle that most people ignore. Your brain strengthens memories based on the pattern of exposure, not just the total amount of study time. Information reviewed at spaced intervals becomes far more durable than information crammed in a single session. This is why students who cram for exams forget everything weeks later, while those who space their study sessions retain information for years. Elite learners build spaced repetition into their learning systems automatically. They don't just read something once and assume they'll remember it. They schedule multiple reviews at increasing intervals. This might mean reviewing new information after 1 day, then 3 days, then a week, then a month. Each review strengthens the memory and extends the retention period. The testing effect reveals another counterintuitive truth about memory. Trying to recall information strengthens memory more than simply reviewing it. Every time you attempt to retrieve information from memory, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with that knowledge. This is why elite learners regularly test themselves instead of just rereading material. This doesn't require formal tests or quizzes. It can be as simple as closing a book and trying to summarize what you just read, explaining a concept to someone else, or writing down the main points from memory. The act of retrieval, even when it's difficult or incomplete, creates learning that passive review cannot match. Emotional encoding is another powerful memory enhancer that most people underutilize. Information paired with strong emotions becomes far more memorable than neutral information. This is why you can remember exactly where you were during major life events, but forget what you had for lunch last Tuesday. You can deliberately leverage this principle by creating emotional associations with important information. This might mean connecting a business lesson to a personal goal that excites you, relating a historical event to contemporary issues you care about, or imagining how new skills will change your life. The more vivid and emotionally engaging you can make the learning experience, the more memorable it becomes. Chunking is another essential technique that helps you remember complex information by organizing it into meaningful units. Instead of trying to memorize a long sequence of random information, you group related items together and treat each group as a single unit. This dramatically reduces the cognitive load and makes large amounts of information manageable. For example, instead of trying to memorize a 10-digit phone number as individual digits, you chunk it into 3 groups: area code, exchange, and number. Instead of memorizing a long list of historical dates, you group them by periods, causes, or themes. This organizational strategy leverages your brain's pattern recognition abilities and makes recall much more efficient. The key to implementing these memory techniques is starting small and building gradually. Begin with simple information and basic methods. Then progressively increase complexity as your skills develop. Like any other skill, memory mastery requires deliberate practice and consistent application. Most importantly, remember that the goal isn't just to memorize more information, it's to develop a reliable system for converting valuable knowledge into permanent, accessible memory. When you master these techniques, learning stops being a temporary experience and becomes a cumulative advantage that compounds over time. Chapter 8. The Art of Application. Turning knowledge into results. Knowledge without application is worthless. You can read every business book ever written, memorize every success principle, and understand every strategy. But if you don't apply what you've learned in the real world, you're just an educated failure. This is the gap that separates the top 1% from everyone else. They don't just collect knowledge, they convert it into results. The harsh reality is that most people treat learning like collecting trophies. They accumulate books, courses, and certificates, as if the act of possession creates value. They confuse input with output, consumption with creation, knowing with doing. They become knowledge hoarders instead of knowledge users, and their potential remains locked away in their heads instead of expressed in their results. The 1% understand something fundamental that the majority miss. Information only becomes valuable when it changes behavior. A brilliant insight that doesn't influence your actions is worthless. A powerful strategy that you never implement is just entertainment. A life-changing principle that you don't apply is no different from never learning it at all. The first barrier to application is what I call the perfection trap. Most people wait until they fully understand something before they attempt to apply it. They want to study every angle, consider every possibility, and master every detail before taking action. This approach guarantees failure because perfect understanding is impossible. And by the time you think you're ready, the opportunity has passed. Elite learners understand that application is part of the learning process, not something that happens after learning is complete. They embrace what I call imperfect action, where you apply partial knowledge and learn from the results. This creates a feedback loop that accelerates both understanding and skill development. You learn by doing, and you improve by iterating. The key is starting with low-stakes applications where failure is cheap and feedback is immediate. If you're learning a new business strategy, test it on a small project before applying it to your entire company. If you're developing a new skill, practice it in safe environments before using it in high-pressure situations. This graduated approach builds confidence and competence simultaneously. Another critical principle is the implementation window. Research shows that if you don't apply new knowledge within 72 hours of learning it, the probability of ever using it drops dramatically. The brain treats unused information as unimportant and begins to forget it rapidly. Elite learners take advantage of this by scheduling immediate applications for everything they learn. This doesn't mean you have to revolutionize your life within 3 days of reading a book. It means finding small, concrete ways to experiment with new ideas immediately. If you learn a new communication technique, use it in your next conversation. If you discover a productivity method, try it tomorrow morning. If you read about a mindset shift, apply it to a current challenge you're facing. The most powerful application technique is called micro-experiments. Instead of trying to implement massive changes all at once, you design small experiments that test new ideas with minimal risk. These experiments should be specific, measurable, and time-limited. They allow you to gather real-world data about what works, what doesn't, and what needs adjustment. For example, if you learn about the power of morning routines, you don't completely overhaul your entire morning immediately. Instead, you might experiment with waking up 15 minutes earlier for 1 week to see how it affects your energy and productivity. Based on the results, you can expand, modify, or abandon the approach. Elite learners also master the art of contextual application, which means adapting principles to fit their specific circumstances rather than trying to copy solutions exactly as presented. They understand that every situation is unique, and blindly following someone else's formula rarely works. Instead, they extract the underlying principles and adapt them to their context. This requires developing what I call principle thinking, where you focus on understanding why something works rather than just how to do it. When you understand the underlying mechanisms, you can adapt strategies to different situations, troubleshoot problems when things don't work as expected, and even develop your own innovative approaches. Another crucial aspect of application is creating accountability systems that ensure you follow through on your learning. Without external pressure, it's easy to let new knowledge remain theoretical. Elite learners build structures that make application inevitable rather than optional. This might mean sharing your learning goals with others who will check on your progress, joining groups focused on similar objectives, or creating public commitments that put your reputation on the line. The specific mechanism matters less than having something that forces you to translate intentions into actions. Documentation is also essential for maximizing the value of your applications. Elite learners keep detailed records of their experiments, including what they tried, what happened, what worked, what didn't, and what they learned. This creates a personal database of insights that becomes more valuable over time. This documentation serves multiple purposes. It helps you remember lessons learned, avoid repeating failed experiments, and identify patterns across different applications. It also provides evidence of your growth and development, which can be motivating during difficult periods. One of the most overlooked aspects of application is learning to fail productively. Most people avoid applying new knowledge because they're afraid of failure. But elite learners understand that failure is feedback. Every unsuccessful application provides data that makes the next attempt more likely to succeed. The key is failing fast, cheap, and with full attention to the lessons available. When an application doesn't work, immediately analyze what went wrong, what you learned, and how you can adjust your approach. This transforms failure from a dead end into a step toward mastery. Elite learners also understand the importance of consistency over intensity in application. It's better to apply new knowledge in small ways consistently than to attempt dramatic changes sporadically. Small, regular applications build habits and competencies that compound over time, while sporadic, intense efforts usually burn out quickly. Finally, the most successful learners develop what I call application thinking, where they automatically look for ways to apply new information as they encounter it. Instead of passively consuming content, they actively ask, how can I use this? Where does this apply in my life? What would happen if I tried this approach? This mindset shift transforms every learning experience into an opportunity for immediate value creation. You stop being a passive consumer of information and become an active creator of results. The knowledge you gain doesn't just sit in your head. It immediately begins changing your life for the better. Chapter 9. Learning from Failure. How setbacks accelerate growth. Failure is not the opposite of learning. It's the most powerful learning accelerant ever discovered. But 99% of people have been programmed to avoid failure at all costs, treating it as evidence of inadequacy rather than opportunity for growth. This fear of failure doesn't just prevent them from taking risks, it actually prevents them from learning effectively, because the most valuable lessons come from experiences that don't go as planned. The education system teaches us that failure is bad, that mistakes should be avoided, and that success means getting things right the first time. This creates a generation of people who are terrified of being wrong, who avoid challenges where they might fail, and who miss out on the exponential learning that comes from intelligent failure. Meanwhile, the most successful people in every field have learned to fail fast, fail cheap, and fail forward. Elite learners understand that failure is not a judgment on their worth or ability. It's data about reality. Every failure contains information about what doesn't work, why it doesn't work, and what to try next. This information is often more valuable than success because it eliminates entire categories of approaches and points you toward more promising directions. The difference between people who are crushed by failure and those who are strengthened by it comes down to how they interpret setbacks. Average people take failure personally, seeing it as evidence that they're not smart enough, talented enough, or worthy enough to succeed. Elite learners see failure as feedback, evidence that their current approach needs adjustment, not that they need to give up. This shift from personal interpretation to process interpretation changes everything. When failure is about you, it's devastating and final. When failure is about your current strategy, it's informative and temporary. You can't easily change who you are, but you can always adjust what you're doing. The key to learning from failure is developing what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. This means believing that abilities can be developed through effort, strategy, and learning from mistakes. People with growth mindsets see challenges as opportunities to improve, setbacks as part of the learning process, and effort as the path to mastery. But having a growth mindset isn't enough. You need specific systems for extracting maximum value from your failures. The most important system is what I call failure analysis, a structured process for examining setbacks to identify lessons and improvements. Every time something doesn't go as planned, elite learners immediately ask 4 critical questions. What specifically happened? Why did it happen? What can I learn from this? How can I adjust my approach? This systematic analysis transforms random setbacks into structured learning experiences. The first question forces you to be objective about what actually occurred, separate from your emotional reaction or interpretation. Often, what feels like total failure is actually partial success with specific areas that need improvement. By getting clear on exactly what happened, you can avoid the distorted thinking that turns minor setbacks into major catastrophes. The second question helps you understand the underlying causes rather than just the surface symptoms. Was the failure due to poor planning, insufficient skill, external circumstances, or some combination? Understanding the root cause is essential for developing effective solutions. The third question shifts your focus from dwelling on the negative to extracting positive value. Every failure contains lessons, but they're not always obvious. Sometimes you need to dig deep to find the insights that will prevent future failures or improve future performance. The fourth question converts insights into action. Learning without application is worthless, and failure analysis without behavioral change is just an intellectual exercise. The goal is to identify specific adjustments that will improve your chances of success next time. Elite learners also practice what I call pre-mortem analysis, where they deliberately imagine failure before it happens and plan how to prevent or respond to it. Before starting any important project or pursuing any significant goal, they ask, how might this fail? What are the most likely points of breakdown? How can I prepare for these possibilities? This isn't pessimistic thinking. It's strategic thinking. By anticipating potential failures, you can either prevent them entirely or minimize their impact when they occur. This approach reduces the emotional shock of setbacks and allows you to respond more quickly and effectively. Another powerful technique is failure farming, where you deliberately seek out small, controlled failures to accelerate learning. Instead of waiting for failure to happen accidentally, you create safe environments where you can fail quickly and cheaply while extracting maximum learning value. This might mean taking on challenging projects where success isn't guaranteed, experimenting with new approaches in low-stakes situations, or deliberately practicing skills at the edge of your ability where failure is likely. The goal is to fail fast and often in controlled environments, so you can succeed when it really matters. Elite learners also understand the importance of failure timing. Not all failures are created equal, and the timing of setbacks significantly affects their learning value. Failures early in a process provide more valuable feedback than failures late in a process, because you have more opportunity to adjust and improve. This is why the most successful entrepreneurs often prefer to fail quickly rather than slowly. Why effective researchers design experiments that can be proven wrong easily, and why elite performers seek immediate feedback that might reveal flaws in their approach. The concept of intelligent failure is crucial here. Not all failures are worth celebrating or learning from. Random failures caused by pure chance, or failures resulting from obvious mistakes, don't provide much value. But intelligent failures, those resulting from thoughtful experiments that push boundaries and test assumptions, are gold mines of insight. Elite learners also develop failure immunity, the ability to maintain confidence and motivation despite setbacks. This doesn't mean becoming immune to disappointment, but it means not letting failure derail your long-term commitment to growth and improvement. This immunity comes from understanding that failure is temporary and specific, not permanent and pervasive. A failed project doesn't make you a failure, it makes you someone who attempted something challenging. A rejected proposal doesn't mean you're incompetent. It means that particular approach needs refinement. Perhaps most importantly, elite learners understand that failure is not just acceptable, it's necessary. You cannot learn to handle complexity, uncertainty, and challenge without encountering situations where things don't go as planned. Avoiding failure means avoiding growth, and avoiding growth means accepting mediocrity. The people who achieve extraordinary results in any field are not those who never fail. They're those who fail most intelligently, learn most completely, and apply those lessons most effectively. They treat failure as tuition paid to the University of Real-World Experience, and they're determined to get their money's worth. Chapter 10. Building expertise. From beginner to world class. Expertise is not a destination. It's a journey without end. But this journey follows predictable patterns that can be accelerated dramatically if you understand the hidden rules of skill development. Most people plateau at basic competence because they don't know how expertise actually develops, while the top 1% continuously advance toward mastery by applying systematic principles that optimize their growth trajectory. The traditional view of expertise suggests that you need 10,000 hours of practice to become world-class at anything. This oversimplified formula has misled millions of people into believing that time alone creates mastery. The truth is far more nuanced and empowering. It's not just the hours you put in, but how you structure those hours that determines your level of achievement. Elite performers don't practice randomly. They engage in what researchers call deliberate practice, a specific type of training designed to improve performance through focused effort on weaknesses. This type of practice is characterized by immediate feedback, specific goals, and constant adjustment based on results. It's uncomfortable, demanding, and often tedious, but it produces exponential improvements that regular practice cannot match. The first stage of expertise development is the cognitive stage, where you're consciously learning the basic rules and procedures. Everything requires intense concentration. Performance is inconsistent, and errors are frequent. Most people find this stage frustrating and give up before progressing to higher levels. But elite learners understand that this discomfort is temporary and necessary. During the cognitive stage, the most important factor is not perfection but consistency. Your goal is to build fundamental habits and basic competencies that will serve as the foundation for advanced skills. This means accepting that you'll be bad at first and focusing on gradual improvement rather than immediate excellence. The second stage is the associative stage, where basic skills become more automatic, and you can focus on refinement and optimization. Errors become less frequent, and you begin to develop intuition about when and how to apply different techniques. This is where most people plateau because they mistake competence for expertise. Elite learners push through this plateau by constantly raising their standards and seeking more challenging applications. They don't just practice what they're already good at. They deliberately practice what they're not good at. They identify their weaknesses systematically and design specific exercises to address them. The third stage is the autonomous stage, where skills become highly automated and you can perform at a high level with minimal, conscious effort. This is where true expertise begins to emerge. But it's also where many people stop growing because they become comfortable with their current level of performance. The most elite performers understand that reaching the autonomous stage is not the end goal. It's the beginning of a new phase of development. They continue to challenge themselves with increasingly complex applications and never stop seeking ways to improve. They understand that mastery is a moving target, not a fixed destination. One of the most critical factors in expertise development is what I call progressive overload for the mind. Just as physical strength requires gradually increasing resistance, cognitive skills require gradually increasing complexity and challenge. You must continuously operate at the edge of your current ability to stimulate growth. This means regularly taking on projects that are slightly beyond your current skill level, seeking feedback from people who are more advanced than you, and deliberately putting yourself in situations where your current abilities are insufficient. This controlled stress forces adaptation and growth in ways that staying within your comfort zone never could. Elite learners also understand the importance of mental models, which are frameworks for understanding how complex systems work. Instead of memorizing isolated facts or procedures, they build comprehensive models that help them predict, explain, and manipulate reality. These models become more sophisticated over time and allow for increasingly complex applications. The development of mental models requires what cognitive scientists call interleaving, which means practicing multiple related skills in rotation rather than focusing on one skill exclusively. This approach initially feels less efficient because progress on individual skills seems slower, but it creates stronger, more flexible abilities that transfer better to real-world applications. Another critical element of expertise development is environmental design. Elite performers don't rely on motivation or willpower to maintain their practice. They structure their environment to make excellence inevitable. This includes seeking out mentors who are already where they want to be, joining communities of other serious practitioners, and eliminating distractions that could derail their development. The role of feedback in expertise development cannot be overstated. Elite learners don't just practice. They practice with immediate, accurate feedback that allows them to adjust their approach in real time. This might come from coaches, mentors, technology, or careful self-monitoring, but it must be specific, timely, and actionable. Self-assessment is a crucial skill that many people neglect. Elite learners develop the ability to accurately evaluate their own performance, identify areas for improvement, and design appropriate practice strategies. This metacognitive awareness accelerates improvement by reducing dependence on external feedback sources. The journey to expertise also requires understanding the difference between performance and learning. Sometimes, training methods that improve immediate performance actually impair long-term learning, while methods that seem to slow initial progress create more durable, transferable skills. Elite learners optimize for long-term development rather than short-term performance. This often means embracing difficulty and confusion as signs of effective learning rather than evidence of inadequacy. When you're struggling to understand or apply new concepts, you're not failing, you're growing. The most productive learning often feels uncomfortable and uncertain. Perhaps the most important insight about expertise development is that it's not just about accumulating skills, it's about developing judgment. Elite performers don't just know what to do, they know when, why, and how much. They develop sophisticated decision-making abilities that allow them to adapt their skills to novel situations. This level of judgment can only be developed through extensive exposure to varied, challenging situations where the stakes matter. You cannot become truly expert through theoretical study alone. You must apply your developing skills in real-world contexts, where failure has consequences and success creates value. The final characteristic of elite learners is that they never stop being learners. Even at the highest levels of performance, they maintain beginner's mind, constantly questioning their assumptions, seeking new challenges, and looking for ways to improve. They understand that expertise is not a certificate you earn once, but a standard you must maintain through continuous growth and adaptation. Building expertise is not about reaching a predetermined destination. It's about committing to a lifetime journey of growth, challenge, and continuous improvement. It's about becoming the kind of person who never stops learning, growing, and pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Chapter 11. Social learning. How to learn from every person you meet. Most people think learning is a solitary activity that happens in libraries, classrooms, or online courses. They see education as something you do alone with books and computers, missing one of the most powerful learning resources available: other people. Every person you encounter knows something you don't, has experienced something you haven't, and possesses insights that could accelerate your growth if you knew how to access them. The top 1% of learners understand that humans are walking databases of experience, knowledge, and wisdom. They've learned to treat every conversation as a potential learning opportunity and every relationship as a chance to expand their understanding. While average people engage in small talk or superficial interactions, elite learners are systematically extracting value from their social connections. This isn't about being manipulative or transactional in your relationships. It's about approaching human interactions with genuine curiosity and a commitment to mutual growth. When you become someone who asks thoughtful questions and truly listens to the answers, you don't just learn more. You also become more valuable to others because you help them clarify their own thinking. The foundation of social learning is developing what I call learning radar, the ability to quickly identify what someone knows that could benefit you. This requires moving beyond surface-level judgments about people's intelligence or education and recognizing that everyone is an expert in something. The janitor might know more about systems and efficiency than the CEO. The taxi driver might understand human nature better than the psychologist. Elite learners have learned to look for knowledge signals in their interactions. These might be unusual word choices that indicate expertise, casual references to complex concepts, or insights that reveal deep thinking about specific topics. When they detect these signals, they immediately shift into learning mode, asking follow-up questions and digging deeper into the person's expertise. The most powerful social learning technique is strategic questioning. Instead of asking generic questions like, "How are you?" or "What do you do?" elite learners ask questions that unlock valuable insights. They might ask, "What's the most important thing you've learned in your field that most people don't understand?" Or, "What mistake do you see people make repeatedly in your area of expertise?" Or, "What trend are you seeing that others are missing?" These types of questions accomplish multiple things simultaneously. They signal that you're genuinely interested in learning, they give the other person an opportunity to share their expertise, and they often reveal insights that you couldn't find in books or courses. People love talking about what they know, and when you ask intelligent questions, they often share surprisingly valuable information. Another crucial skill is conversational threading, where you build on previous topics to dive deeper into areas of expertise. Instead of jumping from topic to topic, you follow interesting threads by asking progressively more specific questions. This allows you to go beyond surface-level knowledge and understand the nuanced thinking that experts have developed through experience. Elite learners also master the art of experience extraction. They understand that people's experiences contain lessons that go far beyond the specific situations they encountered. By asking the right questions about someone's experiences, you can extract principles that apply to your own challenges and opportunities. For example, instead of just listening to someone's story about starting a business, you might ask, "What was the moment you realized your original plan wasn't going to work?" Or, "What assumption did you have that turned out to be completely wrong?" These questions help you extract the underlying lessons rather than just collecting anecdotes. The concept of reverse mentoring is particularly powerful in today's rapidly changing world. This means learning from people who might be younger, less experienced, or from different backgrounds than you. Younger people often have insights about technology, social trends, and emerging opportunities that older, more experienced people miss. People from different industries or cultures bring perspectives that can revolutionize your thinking. Elite learners actively seek out reverse mentoring opportunities. They don't let ego or assumptions about expertise prevent them from learning from anyone who has valuable knowledge. They understand that in a rapidly changing world, fresh perspectives are often more valuable than outdated experience. Building a learning network is another strategic approach to social learning. This means deliberately cultivating relationships with people who can teach you different things. Your learning network might include mentors who are where you want to be, peers who are facing similar challenges, and even people who are just starting out but have unique perspectives or skills. The key to building an effective learning network is providing value in return. This doesn't necessarily mean formal reciprocity, but it means being genuinely helpful when you can, sharing insights that might benefit others, and being someone that people enjoy spending time with because of your curiosity and engagement. Digital platforms have dramatically expanded the possibilities for social learning. You can now learn from experts around the world through social media, online communities, and virtual events. But the principles remain the same. Ask thoughtful questions, listen actively, and look for opportunities to provide value in return. Elite learners also understand the importance of learning conversations versus social conversations. While both have their place, learning conversations are specifically designed to extract and share knowledge. These conversations have a different rhythm and focus, with more emphasis on understanding, exploring ideas, and challenging assumptions. The compound effect of social learning is extraordinary. Every person you learn from expands your perspective, adds to your knowledge base, and potentially opens doors to new opportunities. Over time, you build a vast network of insights and relationships that becomes one of your most valuable assets. Perhaps most importantly, social learning keeps you humble and curious. When you approach every interaction as a potential learning opportunity, you maintain the beginner's mind that is essential for continued growth. You never stop being surprised by what people know and what you can learn if you just ask the right questions and listen carefully to the answers. Chapter 12. Trend Anticipation. Staying 3 steps ahead of change. While most people are reacting to changes after they've already happened, the top 1% are anticipating trends before they become obvious and positioning themselves to benefit from future developments. This ability to see around corners and predict what's coming next is not magic or luck. It's a learnable skill based on specific frameworks and information sources that most people ignore. The pace of change in the modern world is accelerating exponentially, and this creates both enormous risks and enormous opportunities. Industries that seemed permanent can be disrupted overnight. Skills that were valuable for decades can become obsolete in months. New technologies can create entirely new categories of problems and solutions. In this environment, staying current is not enough. You need to stay ahead. The foundation of trend anticipation is understanding that the future is not random. It follows patterns that can be identified and analyzed. Every major trend starts as weak signals scattered across different domains before converging into powerful forces that reshape entire industries. Elite learners have learned to identify these weak signals and connect dots that others don't even see. The first source of weak signals is the intersection between different fields. Major innovations often occur when ideas from one domain are applied to another domain. Elite learners systematically expose themselves to diverse fields and look for concepts that might cross-pollinate. They read outside their industry, attend conferences in unrelated fields, and cultivate relationships with people from different backgrounds. Another crucial source is the edge cases and outliers in your field. The innovations that will transform your industry often start as experiments, side projects, or solutions to niche problems. While most people focus on the mainstream, elite learners pay attention to what's happening at the margins. They track startups, research projects, and unusual applications that might signal future directions. Geographic diversity is also important for trend spotting. Different regions often develop solutions to problems that other regions haven't encountered yet. What's emerging in Asia might predict what's coming to North America in 5 years. What's happening in Europe might signal trends that will reach other markets later. Elite learners maintain global information sources and pay attention to regional variations in how problems are being solved. Generational differences provide another lens for anticipating trends. Younger generations often adopt new technologies, behaviors, and values before they become mainstream. By understanding how different age groups approach problems and opportunities, you can predict which solutions will gain broader adoption as demographics shift. The most powerful trend anticipation framework is what I call forces analysis. This means identifying the underlying forces that are driving change rather than just observing surface-level symptoms. These forces might be technological, economic, social, political, or environmental. But they create predictable pressures that lead to predictable responses. For example, the aging population in developed countries is a powerful force that creates predictable demand for solutions related to healthcare, automation, and age-friendly design. Climate change is a force that drives demand for sustainable technologies and adaptive solutions. The increasing cost of traditional education is a force that creates opportunities for alternative learning methods. Elite learners track these forces systematically and think through their implications across different industries and applications. They ask questions like, if this trend continues, what problems will emerge? And what solutions will be needed? And who is best positioned to provide those solutions? Pattern recognition is crucial for trend anticipation. Many trends are cyclical or follow recognizable patterns that repeat in different contexts or time periods. By studying historical patterns and understanding the underlying dynamics, you can often predict when and how similar patterns will emerge in new situations. This requires developing what I call historical literacy, which means understanding not just what happened in the past, but why it happened and what patterns it represents. Elite learners study history not for its own sake, but as a source of patterns that help them understand how change typically unfolds. Technology adoption patterns are particularly predictable. Most new technologies follow similar curves from early experimentation to mainstream adoption. Understanding these patterns helps you predict which technologies will succeed, when they'll become practical, and how they'll impact different industries. Elite learners also understand the concept of convergence points, where multiple trends intersect to create amplified effects. The combination of artificial intelligence, mobile technology, and ubiquitous internet access created the platform for entirely new categories of applications. The intersection of aging populations, healthcare costs, and sensor technology is creating opportunities for remote health monitoring. Information sources for trend anticipation go far beyond mainstream media and industry publications. Elite learners cultivate diverse information streams, including academic research, patent filings, venture capital investments, government policy documents, and demographic data. They understand that the most valuable signals often come from sources that most people ignore. They also track leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. Leading indicators predict future changes, while lagging indicators confirm changes that have already occurred. Stock prices, enrollment numbers, patent applications, and job postings can all serve as leading indicators if you know how to interpret them. Building scenarios is another powerful technique for trend anticipation. This means imagining multiple possible futures based on different assumptions about how current trends will develop. By thinking through various scenarios, you can prepare for different possibilities and identify robust strategies that work regardless of which future emerges. Elite learners don't just try to predict the future. They position themselves to benefit from multiple possible futures. They develop skills that will be valuable under different scenarios, build networks that provide access to emerging opportunities, and maintain the flexibility to adapt quickly when trends become clear. Perhaps most importantly, they understand that trend anticipation is not about being right all the time. It's about being early enough and positioned well enough to benefit when you are right, while minimizing the cost when you're wrong. They make small bets on multiple trends rather than large bets on single predictions. The ability to anticipate trends is becoming increasingly valuable as the pace of change accelerates. While most people are struggling to keep up with current developments, elite learners are already preparing for what comes next. This forward-thinking approach creates sustainable competitive advantages that compound over time. Chapter 13. The compound effect of learning. How small gains create exponential results. Most people dramatically underestimate the power of small, consistent improvements because they think linearly while compound effects work exponentially. They expect their efforts to produce proportional results. So when they don't see immediate dramatic changes, they conclude that their approach isn't working and give up. This is one of the most costly mistakes in personal development, because the compound effect of learning creates results that seem almost magical to those who don't understand the underlying mathematics. Compound growth is the eighth wonder of the world, and it applies to knowledge and skills just as powerfully as it applies to money. When you improve by just 1% each day, you don't get 1% better each day in a linear fashion. Instead, each day's improvement builds on all the previous improvements, creating an exponential curve that starts slowly but eventually produces extraordinary results. Here's the mathematics that will change how you think about learning. If you improve by just 1% each day for 1 year, you don't end up 365% better. You end up 37 times better. That's a 700% improvement from a seemingly insignificant daily improvement. This is why the elite focus on consistency rather than intensity, systems rather than goals, and long-term thinking rather than short-term results. But the compound effect of learning goes far beyond simple mathematical progression. Knowledge compounds in ways that are even more powerful than financial investments, because new knowledge doesn't just add to your existing knowledge. It multiplies it by creating new connections and possibilities that didn't exist before. When you learn something new, it doesn't exist in isolation. Your brain automatically connects new information to your existing knowledge network, creating associations, insights, and applications that emerge from the intersection of different ideas. This is why Renaissance thinkers who studied multiple disciplines often made breakthrough discoveries that specialists in single fields missed. The more you know, the faster you can learn new things because you have more frameworks for understanding, more patterns for recognition, and more mental models for organizing information. This creates a learning acceleration effect where your ability to acquire new knowledge increases exponentially over time. Elite learners understand this principle and deliberately build diverse knowledge bases that create maximum opportunities for cross-pollination. They don't just study one field deeply, they study multiple fields strategically, looking for connections and applications that others miss. This multidisciplinary approach doesn't dilute their expertise. It amplifies it by providing unique perspectives and novel solutions. The compound effect also applies to learning skills and meta-skills. As you become better at learning itself, every subsequent learning experience becomes more efficient and effective. You develop better techniques for processing information, stronger systems for retention, and more sophisticated frameworks for application. These improvements compound over time, making you not just more knowledgeable, but fundamentally more capable of acquiring and using new knowledge. Network effects create another layer of compounding in learning. As you become more knowledgeable and capable, you attract relationships with other high performers who accelerate your growth further. Your reputation as a learner opens doors to opportunities that weren't previously available. Your expertise becomes a magnet that draws valuable information and experiences toward you. The timing of your learning investments also affects the compound effect. Knowledge and skills acquired early in your career have longer to compound and create value. This is why elite learners front-load their learning investments, sacrificing short-term comfort for long-term advantage. They understand that learning today pays dividends for decades to come. But the compound effect only works if you maintain consistency over extended periods. This is where most people fail because they expect linear results from exponential processes. The early stages of compound growth feel slow and unimpressive, leading people to abandon their efforts just before the curve begins to steepen dramatically. Elite learners develop what I call compound patience, the ability to maintain consistent effort even when results aren't immediately visible. They understand that the most powerful period of compound growth often feels the least rewarding because you're doing the same work for seemingly little additional benefit. But this is precisely when persistence matters most. The compound effect is also why small improvements are often more sustainable and ultimately more powerful than dramatic changes. When you try to improve by 50% overnight, you usually create unsustainable stress that leads to burnout and regression. But when you improve by small amounts consistently, you create sustainable progress that builds momentum over time. This principle applies to all aspects of learning: reading speed, comprehension, memory, application skills, and meta-learning abilities. Small daily improvements in any of these areas compound over time to create dramatic differences in overall learning capacity. Elite learners also understand the power of minimum viable progress. This means setting improvement targets that are so small they feel almost trivial, ensuring that you can maintain consistency even during difficult periods. It's better to read for 5 minutes every day for a year than to read for 2 hours once a week. The daily habit compounds while the weekly effort remains linear. The compound effect extends beyond individual learning to collective knowledge creation. When you share what you learn, you contribute to a collective intelligence that benefits everyone while also reinforcing your own understanding. This creates positive feedback loops where teaching others helps you learn more effectively. Perhaps the most important insight about compound learning is that it's never too late to start, but it's never too early to begin either. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Every day you delay starting a consistent learning practice is a day of compound growth that you'll never recover. The elite understand that learning is not just about acquiring knowledge. It's about building intellectual capital that appreciates over time. While others are spending their mental energy on consumption and entertainment, elite learners are making investments that will pay dividends for the rest of their lives. The mathematics of compound learning is ruthless in its implications. Small differences in learning habits create enormous differences in life outcomes over time. The gap between those who embrace compound learning and those who don't grows wider every day, creating a world divided between those who continuously upgrade their capabilities and those who gradually fall behind. Chapter 14. Building Learning Systems. Creating Automation for Continuous Growth. The difference between people who learn consistently and those who learn sporadically is not willpower, motivation, or natural ability. It's systems. Elite learners don't rely on their feelings or inspiration to drive their education. They build automatic systems that ensure learning happens regardless of their mood, energy level, or circumstances. They understand that motivation is unreliable, but systems are bulletproof. A learning system is a set of interconnected processes, habits, and structures that work together to ensure consistent knowledge acquisition and skill development. Think of it like a machine that runs in the background of your life, continuously upgrading your capabilities without requiring constant conscious effort. Once these systems are properly designed and implemented, they operate automatically, making learning inevitable rather than optional. The foundation of any effective learning system is what I call environmental automation. This means structuring your environment so that learning behaviors are easier to perform than non-learning behaviors. Instead of relying on willpower to choose education over entertainment, you design your surroundings to make the right choice automatic. Environmental automation includes physical setup, placing books in highly visible locations, organizing your workspace to support focus, and removing distractions that compete for your attention. It includes digital organization, curating information feeds that deliver high-value content, using apps that promote learning, and eliminating digital distractions that fragment your attention. It includes social environment, surrounding yourself with people who value growth and learning, joining communities focused on intellectual development, and minimizing exposure to people or influences that discourage educational pursuits. The second component is trigger automation, where you attach learning behaviors to existing habits or events that already occur naturally in your life. Instead of trying to remember to learn, you create automatic cues that initiate learning behaviors without conscious decision-making. This might mean reading during your morning coffee, listening to educational podcasts during every commute, or reviewing notes before bed. The key is linking new learning behaviors to established routines so they become as automatic as brushing your teeth. When the trigger occurs, the learning behavior follows automatically. Elite learners also implement progression automation, where the complexity and challenge of their learning automatically increases over time. This prevents stagnation and ensures continuous growth without requiring constant planning and adjustment. Progression automation might include gradually increasing reading speed targets, systematically exploring more advanced topics in your field, or automatically scheduling periodic skill assessments to identify areas for improvement. Content curation automation is another crucial system component. Instead of randomly consuming whatever information crosses your path, you create systems that automatically deliver high-quality, relevant content aligned with your learning goals. This might include subscribing to curated newsletters, setting up intelligent RSS feeds, or using recommendation algorithms that understand your educational priorities. The elite also automate their feedback loops. They create systems that automatically provide information about their learning progress, helping them identify what's working, what isn't, and what needs adjustment. This might include tracking reading time, monitoring comprehension through regular testing, or maintaining learning journals that capture insights and applications. Spaced repetition automation ensures that important information moves from short-term to long-term memory without requiring manual scheduling. Instead of trying to remember when to review material, automated systems present information for review at scientifically optimal intervals. This maximizes retention while minimizing time investment. Elite learners also automate their application scheduling. They create systems that automatically prompt them to apply new knowledge in real-world situations. This might include calendar reminders to practice new skills, automatic prompts to use new techniques in relevant situations, or systematic reviews of recent learning to identify application opportunities. The concept of learning leverage is crucial for system design. This means creating learning activities that provide maximum value for minimum time investment. Instead of spending equal time on all learning activities, elite systems focus the majority of effort on high-impact areas that drive the most significant improvements. Batch processing is another powerful automation technique. Instead of making individual decisions about what to learn each day, elite learners batch their learning planning into weekly or monthly sessions. This reduces decision fatigue and ensures that learning activities are strategically aligned with long-term goals rather than driven by daily impulses. Technology plays a crucial role in learning system automation, but only when used strategically. Elite learners use technology to eliminate friction, automate routine tasks, and amplify their natural capabilities rather than creating new forms of distraction. They might use apps for spaced repetition, automation tools for content delivery, or AI assistants for research and organization. But the most sophisticated learning systems include failure, recovery, automation. Elite learners understand that consistency will occasionally break down due to illness, travel, emergencies, or simply human nature. Instead of letting temporary breakdowns derail their entire system, they build automatic recovery protocols that quickly restore learning habits after interruptions. This might include minimal learning activities that can be maintained during difficult periods, quick restart procedures that make it easy to resume after breaks, or accountability systems that provide gentle pressure to maintain consistency. The goal is not perfect adherence, but resilient systems that can withstand real-world challenges. System optimization is an ongoing process where elite learners regularly review and improve their learning systems based on results and changing circumstances. They track what works, identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, and continuously refine their approaches. This ensures that their systems evolve and improve over time, rather than becoming static and outdated. The compound effect of learning systems is extraordinary. While most people exhaust themselves trying to force learning through willpower, people with well-designed systems effortlessly maintain consistent growth. Their systems handle the routine aspects of learning automatically, freeing up mental energy for higher-level thinking and application. Perhaps most importantly, learning systems create positive momentum that makes education increasingly enjoyable and rewarding. When learning becomes automatic and effortless, you're free to focus on the inherent satisfaction of growth and discovery rather than the struggle of maintaining habits. This creates a virtuous cycle where success breeds motivation, which strengthens systems, which creates more success. Building effective learning systems requires upfront investment of time and energy, but this investment pays enormous dividends over the long term. While others are constantly fighting to maintain learning habits, you'll have systems that make growth inevitable and sustainable for the rest of your life. Chapter 15. The Forever Student. Maintaining your learning edge for life. The moment you stop learning, you start dying intellectually. Not dramatically, not obviously, but gradually and inevitably. Your knowledge becomes outdated, your skills become obsolete, and your thinking becomes rigid. Meanwhile, the world continues to evolve at an accelerating pace, creating an ever-widening gap between what you know and what you need to know to remain relevant and valuable. This is the challenge that separates the elite from everyone else. Maintaining a learning edge not just for months or years, but for decades. It's one thing to commit to growth when you're young and hungry. It's another thing entirely to maintain that commitment when you're successful, comfortable, and have countless other demands on your time and attention. The most successful people in any field are not those who learned the most early in their careers. They're those who never stopped learning throughout their careers. They understand that in a world of accelerating change, your knowledge has a half-life that's getting shorter every year. What you learned 5 years ago is already partially obsolete. What you learned 10 years ago might be completely irrelevant. This reality creates a stark choice. You can either commit to lifelong learning or accept gradual obsolescence. There is no middle ground. You're either growing or you're dying. You're either staying ahead of change or falling behind. You're either increasing your value or watching it diminish. The foundation of being a forever student is shifting your identity from someone who has learned to someone who is learning. This isn't just a semantic difference. It's a fundamental change in how you see yourself and your relationship with knowledge. When your identity is tied to what you already know, new information feels threatening because it challenges your expertise. But when your identity is tied to your capacity for growth, new information becomes exciting because it represents opportunity. Elite learners develop what psychologists call a growth identity, where their sense of self is based on their ability to adapt, learn, and improve, rather than their current level of knowledge or skill. This identity shift makes continuous learning feel natural and necessary, rather than burdensome or optional. Maintaining a learning edge requires what I call intellectual humility, the recognition that no matter how much you know, you don't know everything. And no matter how expert you become, there's always more to learn. This humility isn't self-deprecation. It's strategic realism that keeps you open to new ideas and prevents the arrogance that stops learning dead in its tracks. The forever student also develops adaptive expertise, which means not just knowing how to apply existing knowledge, but knowing how to learn new knowledge quickly when circumstances change. This requires meta-learning skills, the ability to learn how to learn in new domains, and the flexibility to abandon approaches that no longer work. One of the biggest challenges in lifelong learning is information overwhelm. As you accumulate knowledge over decades, it becomes increasingly difficult to organize, access, and apply what you've learned. Elite learners develop sophisticated knowledge management systems that help them capture, organize, and retrieve information efficiently throughout their lives. This might include digital tools for note-taking and search, physical filing systems for important documents, or mental frameworks for organizing complex information. The specific system matters less than having a systematic approach that prevents valuable knowledge from being lost or forgotten. The forever student also masters the art of selective learning, focusing their limited time and energy on the highest value knowledge while ignoring information that doesn't significantly advance their goals. This requires clear priorities, strong filtering skills, and the discipline to say no to interesting but non-essential learning opportunities. As you advance in your career and life, your learning needs change. Early learning focuses on building foundational knowledge and basic skills. Mid-career learning emphasizes specialization and expertise development. Later career learning often involves integration, wisdom development, and preparing for new phases of life or work. Elite learners understand these phases and adjust their learning strategies accordingly. They don't try to learn everything equally throughout their lives. They focus on what's most relevant and valuable for their current stage, while maintaining flexibility to adapt as circumstances change. Reverse mentoring becomes increasingly important as you age and gain experience. Elite learners actively seek out opportunities to learn from people who are younger, less experienced, or from different backgrounds. They understand that experience can become a limitation if it prevents you from seeing new possibilities or adapting to changed circumstances. The forever student also develops intellectual courage, the willingness to challenge their own beliefs, abandon outdated ideas, and embrace uncertainty. This requires emotional maturity and intellectual security, but it's essential for preventing the mental rigidity that kills learning in later life. Technology creates both opportunities and challenges for lifelong learning. On one hand, it provides unprecedented access to information, courses, and learning opportunities. On the other hand, it creates information overload and constant distraction that can fragment attention and reduce learning effectiveness. Elite learners learn to use technology strategically to support their learning goals while protecting themselves from its negative effects. They leverage digital tools to amplify their capabilities while maintaining the deep thinking and focused attention that real learning requires. Physical health becomes increasingly important for learning as you age. Cognitive function, memory, and attention all depend on physical health factors like exercise, sleep, nutrition, and stress management. Elite learners understand this connection and invest in their physical health as a foundation for continued intellectual growth. Perhaps most importantly, the forever student develops learning love, a genuine passion for growth and discovery that makes continued learning feel like a privilege rather than a burden. When you truly love learning for its own sake, maintaining a learning edge doesn't require willpower or discipline. It becomes a source of joy and fulfillment that enriches your life regardless of external rewards. The compound effect of lifelong learning is staggering. Small daily learning habits maintained over decades create knowledge and capabilities that seem almost superhuman to those who stopped growing early in life. The gap between lifelong learners and everyone else grows exponentially over time, creating advantages that become virtually insurmountable. But the greatest reward of being a forever student isn't competitive advantage or professional success. It's the deep satisfaction of continued growth, the excitement of discovering new ideas, and the confidence that comes from knowing you can adapt to whatever changes the future brings. In a world where change is the only constant, the ability to learn continuously isn't just an advantage, it's a necessity. The future belongs to the forever students, those who never stop growing, never stop questioning, and never stop pushing the boundaries of what they know and what they can become. Your education didn't end when you left school. It's only just beginning. The question is not whether you have time to be a forever student. The question is whether you can afford not to be. Because while you're deciding, your competition is already 3 steps ahead, and the gap is widening every single day.